welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. Today, my guest is former FBI Special Agent Mark Rossini, who's my guest for the fourth time. And today we talk about the African bombings against the American embassies in East Africa in 1998. Mark, thanks for your time again. And other than former FBI Special Agent, I should call you my longtime friend, Mark Rossini, but whatever. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining me again.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all you do, and talking about the subjects that you talk about, because they are extremely important subjects for safety and security of our respective nations and, of course, the world. But I know we were talking, and we want to speak about the East Africa bombings that took place on August 7th, 1998. Near simultaneous bombings, if you will, of the American embassies, respectively, in Nairobi, Kenya, the other one in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I spent 3 months out in Nairobi being the on-ground manager, supervisor of the day-to-day activities of that investigation. I went out there sometime in mid-September. After the bombings happened, I was first at headquarters. And then when the case became an FBI New York case, because originally it was an FBI Washington, D.C. case, and there's a very big political discussion about that, since we all knew in New York that it clearly was an al-Qaeda perpetrated crime, terrorism, act of terrorism, but we'll get to that later, terrorism versus crime. And Washington field office jumped in the fray and said, no, it's an extraterritorial case, so it's ours. And FBI New York, John O'Neill, and Constable Miserino, the Attorney General, made it an FBI New York case. Hence, New York agents took over the investigation.
Well, this is exactly the point where I was going to start your involvement, because you were one of the investigators on the ground for this case. So what are the most striking things you remember about those months you spent there investigating this case? Because you have firsthand knowledge. So you're not only one of the people who know, you know things yourself. You have your personal accounts to tell.
Sure, yeah. Well, I have to say, first of all, it was the most traumatic thing I've ever seen in my life, before, of course, seeing the wreckage of the Twin Towers and the Pentagon in Shakespeare, Pennsylvania. It was the destruction from those bombings was just unbelievable. And you couldn't help, as a human being, when you went to the site, to think about the innocent lives lost in the embassy, the streets, and in particular, this all-girls school whose big windows faced the American embassy, who suffered most of the injury and a lot of death, because when the first flashbang went off that was thrown by Azam, or actually Rashid al-Awali, all the little girls ran to the window to see what the noise was all about. Contrary to what they teach you in an embassy, when there's a loud noise, you hit the ground. They all went to the window, and then the bomb went off. So you can imagine what that glass did to those little children. And when you go to a scene like that, and you look upon that sharded glass and that school and the blood that was still there, you're overwhelmed. It washes over you, witnessing such evil and destruction firsthand that you've only maybe prior seen maybe in a movie. I mean, I've seen my share of dead bodies and done my share of CPR and seen people, in all states of whatever. But that was the most profound thing to hit me, to walk around that embassy ruins and know what went on there, and the abject evil that could perpetrate that, right, by allegedly religious people of religion of alleged peace. which can't get you wrong. I mean, I know I could go. I could talk for this, Leo, for hours.
I know.
Okay, all the things in my head, and all the things that I know, and all the things I experienced. And on that note about the destruction and the evil perpetrated by the religion of peace, that when Raoul Dashir al-Awali was caught and he was being interviewed by Special Agent Steve Gordon, another agent whose name I can't remember, again, I apologize. Steve showed him the pictures of all the dead bodies and the wounded people and said, look, you did this, you did this, you did this. And you did it on a Friday, the Islamic holy day that we should be praying. And he goes, and he answered, he says, oh, and Steve said to him, and the majority of people who killed were Muslims, not even Christian. He said, well, all good Muslims should have been in the mosque. That was his answer. So how do you combat that? How do you deal with that? And how do we, as a Western society that supposedly has standards up to here, relate to that in order to combat that crime? And why do I say that? Because every good investigator has to put themselves in the shoes of their subject and try to figure out what makes them tick, why they commit that homicide, why they do that kidnapping, why they. But this is a different level. This is pure savagery in the name of religion. And us, from our Judeo-Christian standpoint, we can't understand that, and we never will. So we'll always be behind the eight ball as far as trying to predict and premeditate what their next action is, because they have no rationale. And that's the biggest thing for us to try to comprehend. And in investigating the crime, myself, my fellow FBI agents, and agents from the NCIS and the Secret Service and other agencies, federal agencies, were over there, trying at the end of the day, grabbing a beer, saying, why would you do this? For what? For the glory of God? For to be rewarded? The whole 72 version thing, everybody harps on that. That's sophomoric. But for some glorious greeting by Allah for the rest of eternity, it just doesn't make any sense. So even up until today, we are still behind the eight ball. We still don't understand what makes them truly, truly tick. We can try. But okay, getting back to the actual investigation.
Yes, because, well, my next question would have been, well, first off, before I ask my next question, I would like to specify something. Actually, I have Muslim friends who are good people and they hate the terrorists as much as we do. Because, okay, Islam is different from Judaism and Christianity because it's spread out and doesn't have a central control, and it's pretty big. So it's not small as Judaism, but all my Muslim friends hate the terrorists as much as we do. So
of course,
it's even more. And of course, you also have Muslim friends because I know the story behind this.
When I was in FBI New York, I was head of the Muslim Community Outreach Program, and every Friday, I went to a mosque and I gave a talk. And I had lunch with the senior members of the mosque and the imam afterward. And we would always, it was a great bridge builder, and it was a great involvement in the community for them understanding us and me and the FBI understanding them. And at the end of the day, well, there was hardly any women, so I apologize. But
of course,
these men that I met with were just normal guys trying to make a living and feed their families. Just like my Italian and Armenian grandparents came over from their respective old countries and tried to make a life in America and did. And all they wanted to do was work and provide for their loved ones. So what I saw on these Fridays were that, and also a great desire to be American. Unequivocally. But there's this radical part that has hijacked the narrative, and I don't know what they can do to get that back. I really don't know because Islam is so foreign to the Westerner, to particularly the American. Um, it's just not understood. But
My next question would have been indeed, how did you guys figure out that it was Al Qaeda? Because let's not forget that this is probably the first case in which Al Qaeda was actually carrying out the attack.
right,
Because in the previous cases that we have, that would be, for instance, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and also the
right,
murder of Rabbi Meir Kahane in New York 2 years
right,
prior than that, if I remember well. Al Qaeda was part of it, was
right.
financing, was supporting, but not actually carrying out the attacks. So, how did you guys understand that Al Qaeda was the perpetrator of these attacks in Africa?
Well, you're right. You bring up the murder of Maya Kahana, and that was, in retrospect, now looking at it, the big shot across the bow. We're here on American soil, and anecdotally to that, when that happened, I was right across the street walking to Grand Central Station.
Ooh.
And as I'm walking to Grand Central, all this noise is coming out of the hotel and the commotion, the cops are arriving. And I'm like, what's going on here? Little did I know, right? Just before I was in the FBI. And then you have the 93 bombing, which we know is Al Qaeda. And then we start as a US government, as the CIA, as the FBI, and US intelligence community started to monitor them, started to try to understand who they were, trying to look into who this Osama bin Laden was. Now, I, of course, when I got in the FBI, my first 6 years, 1991 and 97, I was working, normal criminal cases, right? Fraud against the government cases, uh, a murder for money hire over here, whatever. Doing a whole hodgepodge of things. Uh, Medicaid, Medicare fraud, public corruption squad, et cetera. Insurance fraud. Um, and then I got sent over to JTTF in May 97 because they were looking for experienced criminal investigators. Because remember, up until today, terrorism is a crime and it's investigated from a criminal point of view. It's changed now since 9/11 and thereafter, but you still have a thing called the Constitution. So we're still looking at the players and the perpetrators, or the suspected players and perpetrators, and monitoring them and looking to see what criminal activity that they are up to or they have committed in order to stop them in their path and to put them in jail, let's say for lying on an immigration form. Can't really put them in jail for making a bunch of phone calls and trying to buy some TNT, perhaps, that they talk in code, but we all know what they're trying to buy. But we lock them up because they lied on an immigration form. So we're still using the law in that respect. Because it's still, even though we talk about the global war on terror, we're still not treating it like a war where you actually go out and like kill the enemy before they come to your front line and kill you. We're still treating it like an investigative plan. And most probably, I think our current President Trump has it in his brain that he wants to start treating it as a real war, and even like drug dealers going after them before they deal the drug, if you will. I don't know where that's going to take us and where we're going to go with that, but we'll see. So we start looking at bin Laden heavily in the mid 90s. And fortuitously, a gentleman named Jamal al-Fadl, aka Junior, walked into the American embassy in Eritrea in 1996 and turned himself in, basically, saying that he was a member of Al Qaeda. He sought the safety of the U.S. because apparently Junior had, if I remember correctly, had training in finances, or was I guess, the accountant of Al Qaeda while bin Laden was in exile in Sudan. And Junior misappropriated with some money, as I understand it, somewhere to the tune of maybe $80,000 to $100,000. And bin Laden, when he found out, was like, "Oh, it's okay. He's a good boy. I forgive him." And whereas Ayman Zawahiri wanted to kill him and wanted him dead. And so the edict to have Junior murdered by Zawahiri, which many people pronounce Zawahiri, whatever, caused Junior to turn himself in and seek protection of the USA. And he became our most valuable asset, understanding the inner workings and the players and who's who of al-Qaeda. It was remarkable. Now that's 96, okay? Now, up until 98, 97, I go to the JTTF, but up until 98, my first year, I'm working Hezbollah, the FARC, the IRA, the Tamil Tigers, hodgepodge of the terrorism groups. I'm not even focused on Osama bin Laden or al-Qaeda. That wasn't on my radar. The only thing I knew about al-Qaeda was that Junior was under 24-hour protection by the JTTF. And we all did rotating shifts protecting him, but we were not allowed to talk to him about anything. Only two people were allowed to talk to him: Dan Coleman, who was on I-49, and one of the gentlemen from the CIA and some prosecutors, but that was it. The rest of us couldn't speak to him about al-Qaeda. And of course, then Nairobi happens. But I don't know if Junior did reveal to the FBI, CIA, or the NSA the telephone number of Ahmed al-Hada in Sana'a, Yemen, which was the al-Qaeda switchboard, which we'll get to later when we talk about Dawood Rashid al-Awali, which is, whereas I know from an FBI, JTTF perspective, that I first learned or knew of that telephone number. But there's every reason, suspicion to believe that that number had been learned back in 96 by the NSA, and the NSA was listening to it since then, as was the CIA, as had said Mike Scheuer in previous documentaries. But I want to make sure I'm right about Scheuer if he didn't talk about from 98 onward. But nonetheless, there's strong evidence to believe that that phone number in Sana'a, Yemen was being listened to as far back as 1996. And when I say listened to, I meant listened to like real time and also downloaded and recorded for future listening and deciphering and analysis. So as a result of that revolution by Junior, an investigation is mounted by the CIA along with the Kenyan National Police into the Nairobi al-Qaeda cell and the greater the greater East Africa al-Qaeda cell. And then, of course, you have then the perpetration of the simultaneous bombings that we said on Friday, August 8th, 1998. Excuse me, August 7th, 1998. So what I said to you and privately and to other people like yourself who have interviewed me about the subject, I am in profound disbelief and also anger that there was never a 9/11 type hearing for East Africa bombings. And that was extremely troubling, disturbing, and just outright wrong, because perhaps it could have maybe helped prevent the 2001 bombings. I don't know. But it was despicable that there was nothing done. As I had mentioned earlier, not with you, with other people, that, look, even getting the 9/11 Commission to start took the proverbial act of Congress, and literally because of public outrage. But the East Africa bombings were something that happened over there, right? 10,000 miles away. Those people, they knew the danger. They died, right? That's the kind of them sad and sick mentality we have. But horrific nonetheless. But why there was never a hearing into that, and why no one was held accountable in the U.S. government, because you can't tell me if you did a proper drill down review of all the material, information, and intelligence gathered on the East Africa cell, you would not have been able to prevent those attacks. Okay?
Of course.
Not that I ever viewed those tapes, records, interviews, but there's a proverbial room filled with transcripts marked with the code worded binders that I can't mention the code word of that investigation that was headed by Alex Station Mike Scheuer, who apparently in his mind is the greatest investigator in the world for counterterrorism. So why did that happen, Mike? Why did that happen, CIA? Same thing. Why didn't you let Doug Miller's memo go that Doug and I wanted to send to the FBI in January 2000, notifying the FBI that hijackers had arrived from Malaysia? Two guys, or at least one guy who traveled, you followed halfway around the globe because you knew he was traveling pursuant to the listening of the Hatta House in Sana'a, Yemen. Did you follow me? Am I going too fast maybe for the audience?
No, you're not.
No, I
You're
know.
not. That's totally fine. Yeah,
The
no,
person
but
listening to this, I want them to understand what I just said. Let's rewind. Junior, Jamal Al-Fadl, walks into the American Embassy in Eritrea in 1996, confesses all he knows about al-Qaeda, and inevitably, no doubt, he knew about the Hada home, as I call it, in Sana'a, Yemen, which was the al-Qaeda switchboard. The NSA goes up on that number in 1996, every reason to believe it did. So does the CIA. It's from listening to that switchboard post the East Africa attacks, we learned that Khalid al-Midhar, the son-in-law of Ahmad al-Hada, is going to travel from home via Dubai to a meeting, summit, as they say, in Kuala Lumpur. And so the CIA enlists the help of the Dubai Special Branch, Dubai Special Police. And when he lands in Dubai, just secondary him, go through his things, and then when he goes to his hotel room, they break in, they get a key, and they photocopy everything. And they photocopy his passport, and his passport is a visa to come to the US. And then they ask and task the Malaysia Special Branch for them to monitor the group. And they also have their own people there monitoring that group and taking pictures of the meeting in the park that they had. And this time, al-Midhar is joined by Ahmed Nawaz al-Hamzi, okay? And then those two are followed around Malaysia, and then they're all lost. But then they learned that they're on an airplane and came to America. We have their flight information that the NSA has. That's what Doug Miller wanted to tell the FBI about. That's what Doug Miller came to me and said, we got to tell the FBI about this. And I said, yes, Doug, write the memo. And he writes the memo, and the CIA rejects it and spikes it, kills it, buries it, will not let it be sent. So I ask you, to this day, 24 years later almost, why no one has answered that question, why Doug's memo was not sent. Our very good friend and colleague, Adam Fitzgerald, interviewed Mike Scheuer, and Mike Scheuer admitted that if he had still been in charge of Alex Station on that day, he would not have let the memo go either. You tell me. It's all in my 20-page memo, right, Leo? All my thoughts, all my reasons as to why, all the politics involved, all the balance of power in the Middle East, all the economy about oil, it's all there. But we just kind of go, Charlie.
But Mark, what I'm wondering here is, do you have an answer to the question why there was no inquiry for the 98 Africa
No
attacks?
political will, man, and it wasn't important enough.
So the bottom line is...
No. Isn't that sick? Benghazi was done because it was political fucking theater, right?
Yeah.
After all these hearings, all these countless, how many millions and millions and millions spent, nothing. Not that I love Hillary Clinton, hate Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, Joe Biden, Obama, Bush, Clinton, Trump. I don't give a fuck. I have no love for anybody. Okay. But the Benghazi issue was exploited just for political issue, like Whitewater. Okay. Waste of fucking time. Okay. No inquiry about East Africa. Why? Because it maybe would have exposed the inner failings of the very agencies that were meant to protect us and should have been at the helm in stopping this stuff. Now, as I always say, I work with men and women at the CIA that are incredible, dedicated, The CIA does things every day that a movie can't even imitate. They get things done that you'll never understand or realize. But certain things, certain political things, just don't cut it. It's inexcusable. And that's what we're dealing with here. So remember, it happened over there, East Africa, 10,000 miles away, if my geography is correct. Two embassies that most Americans, two countries most Americans will never go to. Maybe they're going on a safari, but how many Americans have the money to go on a safari? So it's very limited, very, very limited. And there was, even amongst educated people, I told a colleague, Adam, the other day, who was speaking about this. I was having drinks with some friends right after I got back, because some friends that work at a Merrill Lynch, they were all highly educated stockbrokers. And I'm the only FBI agent in the group. And I get in a conversation with some people. And one young lady asked me what I do. And I tell her, she goes, "Oh, terrorism. Wow, you're an FBI agent." I said, "Yeah, you travel a lot?" I said, "Yeah. Matter of fact, I just got back. I was 3 months in Nairobi investigating the bombing there." And she said, "Oh, yeah, I heard about that. Oh, yeah, I heard about that." Remember, those were exact words. I can still see her in my mind's eye. I heard about that. So that's the sentiment. Where something happened, made the headlines, day or two, maybe some, there were some dedicated reporters that went after it. But I heard about that. So it didn't really conjure up this grand congressional thought we have to have a committee. But like I said, there was resistance to form a 9/11 committee. Because you know why, Leo? Because it happened in New York.
Yeah.
New York. That's not America. That's New York. They deserve what happened to them. They deserve it. And the Pentagon, oh yeah, but not that many people died. So when the plane in Pennsylvania will hit a field so, but serious, man, sickeningly, happened in New York. It's expected to happen there. But all those motherfuckers around the country were glad to take the Homeland Security money when it all came around to get brand new fucking fire trucks. And now they're all terrorist experts. But no one really cared about doing even the 9/11 Commission. It was only by the power and will of the families of the victims, people like Terry Strada and others, that demanded this happen. I won't even tell you the nightmare that lady went through trying to get members of Congress to even listen to her, and the indignity that she suffered from some members of Congress that were insinuating, insulting. One of them even said to her, "Well, you've got enough money already. Just shut up."
I know. I've heard a few of these stories, yeah, during
And
these years of
I had an
investigating
old
this.
colleague of mine, Chuck Fromm, said, "You speak with forked tongue."
Of course. Well, this is also a lack of lesson learned, we can say, because not only there was no inquiry, and as we said, there was one for Benghazi, but I'm saying we,
Multiple.
even if I'm not American, okay, whatever, we underrated the threat, and
Right,
that led to 9/11, because we
right.
can also blame it on underrating the threat.
Of course, we could blame it on the rain, the threat. We can blame it. We can blame it again. We can blame it on underrating it by treating it as a normal criminal activity. I just can't look. I'm Italian and Armenian, the two groups that are both in the
Yeah,
mafia. Right? So you can't arrest a bunch of Armenians hanging out in a street corner in L.A. and a bunch of Italians hanging on a street corner in the Bronx just because they might be in the mafia. You can't round them up,
sure.
okay? Because they might be just guys hanging out, relaxing, talking. Doesn't mean they're in the mob or their respective mob. But when it comes to terrorist activity, people that you are utilizing the intelligence community tools, FISA, 2.50 authority, but all these other issues, all these other rules and regulations you have, you are you're taking an extra step. Okay. In your heart of hearts, as an agent, as an investigator, that person's a terrorist. They are communicating on this channel, that channel. They're in this mosque with that radical imam who's connected to. You know who you're dealing with. You're not making this stuff up that a bunch of guys with a vowel with their last name are on a street corner in the Bronx. Okay, no, we're talking a different level here. But we're still treating that terrorist who's attending those sermons done by Abdul Rahman and Hamza in London, okay, and other radical imams around the globe, and coordinate with other terrorists going in and out of the camps out of Pakistan and Afghanistan. And we're saying, let's wait till they do something criminal. Let's wait till they spit on the sidewalk. Let's wait till they drop a stick of gum. Then we can make a case and we can stop them. So the question that I have is, how do we make that switch, Leo, and go from looking at it as a criminal activity or people that are, we hope, commit some sort of crime, and then we arrest them. God forbid they commit the crime of a bomb exploding or shooting people up, right? And then we arrest them. Too late. Where do we go to actually, in the words of Donald Rumsfeld, calling it the global war on terror, the GWAT? I heard that expression so many times after the illegal invasion of Iraq that I wanted to fucking throw up. The GWAT, the GWAT, the GWAT. What does that fucking mean? If it's a war, then we treat it like a war. But we have to do so at our own peril and what we can tolerate and live with at the exercise of our power. And are we ready as a society to go down that road? And if it is a war, does that mean that the good countries come together? America, Europe, Canada, right? Anybody else who wants to be good.
Sure.
And hey, look, you got a terrorist at that mosque in Milan. Well, coming in, he's disappearing, going to Guantanamo. And you, Giorgio Maloney, go, got it, no problem. Hey, Mr. Macron, and that mosque in Dijon, there's a bunch of guys hanging out every Friday, and we know they're up to no good. They're enemy combatants. You got a problem with that? Got no problem with that. Take them away. Are we ready for that? Is Mr. Starmer, if I pronounce his name correctly, in the UK, is he ready for that? I don't know.
We're not.
I don't know. Is he?
Because it only depends on if other governments are on the same wing.
On board, right?
Okay, that's the only bottom line. Otherwise, politicians all around the world would lie like with no respect for their population. Well, Mark, something else happened after this attack in Africa, and I would like to hear your opinion on this, because actually the Clinton administration retaliated in a very weird way, let me say, because they bombed two places.
Moronic way? Weird? I mean, say moronic.
I'll leave that to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Because they did something that actually made some sense in Afghanistan by bombing an al-Qaeda plant, where an al-Qaeda station or training plant where Osama bin Laden was supposed to be, but actually fled a few hours before. That's allegedly what we know, because of course we're not sure. But at the same time, and while that made some sense, they also bombed a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan, and that screwed up the whole country, because they left the population with no medications for a while, and I really don't get it. So I think that you already said some of your thoughts by calling it moronic rather than weird, but would you like to tell us your thoughts about it?
Because the intelligence was flawed. The same way we had the fucking same, I curse a lot, that's fine. Hope no one gets offended, but I really don't care anymore. Same way we listened to that fluke con man fraud curveball, right? Because you only hear what you want to hear, like, you know, the Simon and Garfunkel song. A man hears what he wants to hear and disregards the rest. So we only wanted to hear about curveball and Saddam Hussein, and he's got weapons of mass destruction. All we wanted to hear was, al-Shifa, bin Laden was in Sudan. So therefore, without verifying the intelligence, because once that proverbial train gets in motion in Washington, D.C., and someone has an idea that people say, oh, yeah, he's right, he's pretty smart, he knows what he's talking about. No one has the balls to go, hey, wait a second, stop. I don't want to be a party pooper here because I know you all want to get I know you want to get all excited and hard. Well, let's stop with the power. Are we doing the right thing? Okay. This plant had nothing to do with anything, nothing. And people will try and try to have some semblance that they're connected to terrorism somehow in order to justify, in order to exploit on the internet, in order to get their position known, that it wasn't that bad. It was wrong. The intelligence was flawed. But of course, Clinton was forced basically into a corner. They had to act because it looks presidential. No, it's not. No, it's
Well,
not.
maybe bombing the al-Qaeda stations in
That
Afghanistan made sense,
got no problem with that. Got
but the problem was the
no
other
problem with
bombing.
that. The problem with is al-Shifa. Now you could say, look, hey, we get things wrong. Okay. But admit it. There's nothing wrong with the truth. Nothing. Nothing. Nothing saying we got it wrong. But we don't, which is the problem. Same thing after 9/11, going into Afghanistan. Fine. Fine. But then lying to connect that to Saddam Hussein to justify going into Iraq. Trump is correct about Dick Cheney and all them. They were wrong.
And
Wrong.
making up evidence, making up
Wrong. Made
evidence.
up evidence. Remember, I was there at the CIA. I remember going into work that morning when that whole yellow cake thing with the Nigerian embassy was broken into and the whole Rocco Martino fiasco. And I'm looking at this going, why would anybody break into that embassy? It's yellow cake. Would you stop? This is all bullshit. But see, some people are above the law. They get away with everything and they never face consequences. Again, we don't have the balls, the temerity to have a hearing about Cheney, Wolfowitz, Fife, and all those other people involved with the illegal invasion of Iraq to hold them and put them in jail, hold them accountable.
But do you think it's possible that that bombing in 98 also happened because President Clinton wanted to show himself off as the powerful guy
No,
and also to divert the attention from the Lewinsky scandal?
no, not to let the bombing happen. No,
No, not to let the bombing happen.
no.
Sorry, the retaliation, I mean, their own bombing.
Well, you know what, Leo? That's a very good possibility. And sadly enough, there might be some kernel of truth to that. I don't know what went on in the man's mind, but a much needed diversion or headline in the wake of that with the whole Lewinsky issue, which was moronic in itself anyway. I remember when that whole thing went on, I actually was in Spain on an investigation. Even though I was working counterterrorism, I got asked to work on a art fraud case because I speak Spanish. And I was in a courtroom in Malaga, Spain. And this is March '98. And I'm there with a prosecutor from New York and a Spanish prosecutor. And we're trying to get the extradition of somebody, or forget what it was, exact court hearing it was. And I remember the judge smoking like a chimney on the stand, on behind the bench, right? And she says, before we start, Mr. FBI agent, come here, I want to talk to you. And I went, okay. And the American prosecutor looked at me. She goes, what is that about? I said, I don't know. I'll find it. I'm going with you. I said, okay. You don't speak Spanish, but let's go. So we go up to the bench. And the judge says, Agent Rossini, what is it with your country and the FBI and all of you investigating Clinton and this thing with the girl? And all the prosecutor had to hear was Clinton. So what is she saying? I said, don't worry, I got a handle. I said, Your Honor, basically, I said nice Spanish. I said, it's a bunch of bullshit and a waste of time. She goes, I agree. Go back. And then she ruled and we got our extradition. But what I'm driving at is the whole world looked at that whole Lewinsky thing as garbage and a waste of time, which of course was just exploited in order for political gain, right? Again, not that I love Clinton, hate Clinton, but that's why people hate Washington, D.C. That's why the world laughed at us over that. Look at Francois Hollande. of Paris. He had a girlfriend. He snuck out of the Elysee Palace every night and went to his girlfriend's home. Everybody laughed and went, oh, that's his personal life. That's his private life. Who gives a damn? Let him run the country. Let him run the government. And the government, by the way, was running perfectly fine under Bill Clinton. As a matter of fact, we had a balanced budget. Matter of fact, we had a surplus. But that wasn't good enough for the Christian evangelicals and all the psychotics that hated Bill Clinton. So, we're going to exploit this male failing trait of his. Meanwhile, half the people accusing him had affairs themselves and probably babies out of wedlock and had their girlfriends get abortions too. But I digress. So yes, did Clinton do that attack as a way to shift the news? Perhaps. But maybe if they kept their mouths shut and weren't so petty and stupid, maybe he wouldn't have made the silly mistake. Ever think about that? And the people that worked in that plant, those innocent people, would still be alive. But the rabble rousers and the ultra puritanicals, who are just frauds anyway, can can lie in their bed safely at night saying, we got that man out of office. He was a cheat and a liar. Really? Someone's dead.
I will remind you, I'm Italian, and we had Berlusconi in power for a long time, and I totally do not care what he did in his private time. And if I were American, I would not care at all about what Mr. Clinton did in his private time. That's his business, not mine.
Exactly correct. It was so hypocritical. It was
so. For the retaliation in Afghanistan, where they missed bin Laden, do you think that because we have contradictory accounts here. Someone said, even high-profile researchers, someone says that he was there a few hours before, and someone says that he was never there. I don't recall by heart who said that, but I think one of them was Lawrence Wright. So, but don't quote me on that because I might be wrong. What are your thoughts? Do you think that there was a chance of killing him, or it was just, again, to show off the power?
No, I think there probably was a real chance to get him, but the intelligence was not extremely accurate, which is one of the greatest. It's a failure, but it's also a very real obstacle. And it shows the limitations that we have as an intelligence gathering community. In that, look, it's very easy to infiltrate, if you will, not easy, but it comes with a better chance of infiltrating, let's say, a motorcycle gang, a drug cartel, a mafia family on our soil or in a Western society than we do implanting an actual FBI agent or some other law enforcement agent in an undercover capacity in that country. And that was always the failure of the CIA and the FBI and other organizations, because we can never know what was going on. There was no Donnie Brasco. There was no man on the inside, which, if you go back to Richard Clarke, when Cofer Black first becomes head of CTC, they have a hallway conversation in which Richard Clarke says to Cofer, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. And Cofer has like this troubled look on his face. And he said, one of the things I have to change is we have to get better sources inside al-Qaeda, which to me was a light bulb moment, which said, this is why Doug's memo didn't go. They were hoping maybe that they could recruit Khalid al-Midhar to get somebody on the inside of al-Qaeda. It's always been my theory, because we had nobody inside to tell us what was actually going on. Yeah, they were double agents, but actually they were actually triple agents. Okay, as we saw from the gentleman who blew himself up, that Jordanian doctor who killed himself and killed my friend Jennifer Matthews and 64 other people on December 26th. But this is the problem. So how good was the intelligence? Could have been old intelligence, old by a few hours is old. Okay. Donnie Brasco walking out of a social club and saying John Gotti's in there, that's minutes.
Yeah.
But an undercover FBI agent or CIA agent inside al-Qaeda, for them to get to their communication system to relay the message, impossible.
It takes years.
I remember this is before 9/11, and we were what we call red teaming, spitball ideas. You throw them out. This is April 2001. And I was at the CIA then because I got assigned there in January 99. And big conference room. And I raised my hand. I go, look, I got an idea. Why don't we take an FBI agent? I was thinking Ali Soufan. He speaks Arabic. Why don't we arrest Ali for some stupid thing? Make it up, right? Just make it up. Arrest him for, I don't know, doing whatever. Make some charges, arrest him, and he gets sentenced to a few months, maybe a year in jail. Right. On the books, he's in jail. He's not really in jail, but every official thing you encounter, newspapers, jail, blah, blah. And after a year, he's out. He can't get a job. He becomes bitter. Now he wants to join al-Qaeda. Tell him what the FBI and CIA is doing against him, what he remembers. And he's Arabic, speaks Arabic. Welcome into the club. It was like, yeah, you know what? That's like the shit. Because they were red teaming. This is, you can talk like shit in the movies, right? Because you're just throwing out ideas, and maybe from that crazy idea, something solid will come. I'll never forget. I forget who the person was, but someone raised their hand and said, "Mark, great idea. But will the Attorney General, Ms. Reno at the time, will she allow him or any other agent we put in there to actually engage in an act of terrorism or murder somebody as a proof? Let's say he's not able to get to his handler or get to his communication equipment, and a bunch of them get in a truck and go to a market and blow up the market and kill women and children. And he's got to pull the trigger, or he's got to go to Afghanistan and commit an act of terror. Are they going to allow that to happen? Would the Attorney General authorize that activity? Donnie Brasco can easily make a mistake. He can easily get sick, throw up, fall down, break his ankle, break his face, go to the hospital. An undercover agent in al-Qaeda, who's actually an American, will not have such luxury. So that's the problem of the intelligence failure. Could be a few hours, could be a few days. Or from that double agent or the intel that we had or the satellite wasn't fast enough. That's why we lost them.
Mark, I think we reached the end of it. We reached the end of our discussion.
Sorry. I know I ramble on, man. Sorry.
No, I love when my guests do that, because the guest always knows more than I do what needs to be discussed. So
you know what you're doing, man.
Okay, Mark, thanks again for your time and for covering this topic for the first time, because this is actually our fifth interview, because the first one was only written, and this is the first time we covered this topic, and we've known each other for 9 years now, but I've always wanted to do this interview about Africa in '98, and eventually we made it.
Thank you. You all.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all in my next episode. Bye-bye.